Okay, so full disclosure. When I first saw the request for this deep dive, I kind of thought, wait, is this a prank? Space Marines versus furries. I mean, it sounds like something out of a fever dream, right?
Yeah, it's definitely not your typical matchup.
Not at all. But then I actually watched the Flash Kids animation, Furry Crusades, and I was like, okay, this is comedic gold.
Oh, yeah, they really went all out with it.
Absolutely. So for our listeners who haven't braved this unique corner of the internet yet,
Yeah.
we're going to be taking a deep dive into this animated short. And trust me, it's a wild ride. But before we get to the fur-flying action, we need some context. So for those who may not be familiar with the grimdark universe of Warhammer 40K, can you give us a quick rundown on who exactly Space Marines are?
Sure. So in the Warhammer 40K universe, Space Marines are basically, they're the ultimate warriors. They're genetically engineered. They wear power armor. They're armed with these incredibly powerful weapons. They're basically the Emperor's finest, devoted to protecting humanity from, well, pretty much everything. Xenos, heretics, you name it.
Okay, so we're not talking about just your average soldiers here. These guys are the real deal. And their opponents. Well, I don't think I need to explain what Fuis are, but
Right.
what makes this matchup so unexpected?
I think it's the contrast, right? You think about the typical image of a Space Marine. They're grim, they're disciplined. It's all about duty and conquering in the name of the Emperor. And then you have furries, who are often associated with this more whimsical, expressive kind of energy.
Yeah, it's a real clash of cultures, to say the least.
Definitely, like mixing oil and water, but the oil has a bolter and the water is wearing a giant, I don't know, fox costume or something.
Yeah, something like that. So the video opens in this incredibly lush and vibrant forest, total furry hangout spot. But the peace is about to be shattered.
Oh, yeah. Like right out of the gate, we get this classic ambush scene. Space Marines dropping from the sky, chainswords revving, ready to cleanse the forest of, well, whatever they consider these furries to be.
Mm.
Heretics, I guess.
And the dialogue is just priceless. Like right away, one of the Space Marines yells about them falling into a big gay trap. I mean, right from the start, this isn't your typical Warhammer 40K story.
No, not at all. They're definitely leaning into the comedic side of things.
Yeah, it's brilliant how the humor works on so many different levels. You've got the absurdity of the situation itself, then you've got the over-the-top dialogue, and then the animation style itself, which is it's like a Saturday morning cartoon on steroids.
Yeah, the animation style definitely adds to the humor. It's exaggerated, it's expressive, and it just perfectly matches the outlandish nature of the whole premise.
Oh, for sure. And the lines just keep getting better. I mean,
Yeah.
we've got, we'll spade and neuter until there's nothing left. Does my ass listen to me? Abomination. I was dying.
It's like they took every Warhammer 40K trope and then cranked it up to 11.
Yeah, and then mixed it with, I don't know, every fantasy trope, too. Like, for example, the furry leader, Stevasad. He claims that the Space Marines stole their magical artifacts, which is why the furries are so weak now. It's that classic take away the source of power plot device you see in so many stories.
Right, exactly.
Which makes you wonder, what kind of magical artifact would a furry overlords even have? Like a giant squeaky toy of ultimate power.
Yeah.
A mystical scratching post that grants wishes.
I don't even know. But it's that kind of thinking. That's where this video takes you. You just start going with it.
Yeah, and then it takes this turn towards this darker humor. Like when one of the Space Marines starts, calling the furries all these offensive names, it definitely pushes the boundaries of what's acceptable.
Yeah, and that's where it gets a little tricky, right? It's like, is this just edgy humor? Or is it actually trying to say something about prejudice and discrimination?
Yeah. I mean, on the one hand, it's playing on those real-world prejudices, the way certain groups are dehumanized and othered.
Yeah.
Like, in a way, it's kind of holding up a mirror to society, right?
Right.
But it's doing through satire.
Right.
So it's using humor to make us confront these uncomfortable truths. And then there's that line about furries having no dad to play catch with, which, obviously a joke, but it maybe hints at something deeper.
Maybe, yeah. Like the need to belong, to find a community where you feel accepted. Maybe that's part of it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's wild how this seemingly ridiculous video can actually touch on these really profound themes.
It's pretty clever how they do that.
Yeah. But okay, before we go too deep down that rabbit hole, we can't forget about the Space Marine Sergeant's report. Now that's where the Warhammer 40K parody goes into overdrive.
Oh, yeah, definitely. The way he describes the planet is so over the top. It's like they landed on a death world straight out of the most gruesome 40K lore.
Oh yeah, it's all seismic activity and pyroclastic flows. I mean, come on, they're making it sound like the apocalypse. And then the casualties, right? Brother Brevetto was the first to be taken by this creature forest. I mean, what are they fighting? Sentient trees.
Right. And then there's the mountain that's red and angry. I mean, it's a mountain. How can it be angry?
But here's the kicker. The planet itself is watching them. That's when it takes this turn for the creepy, but somehow it's still hilarious.
It is, isn't it? It's this weird mix of horror and comedy that somehow just works.
Yeah, like sometimes the things that scare us can also make us laugh, you know,
Yeah,
especially when they're presented in such an absurd way.
exactly.
So far we've got Space Marines, we've got furries, we've got a sentient angry planet, and we've got a whole lot of laughs.
Yeah, it's a lot to process.
It is. And we're just getting started. All right, so we left off with our intrepid Space Marines facing down a pretty unusual foe. And a sentient planet that seems to be, not too happy with them being there.
Yeah, things are definitely about to escalate. This is where the video really leans into those classic video game tropes, especially when it comes to boss battles.
Oh, yeah, the dramatic entrance, the flashy attacks, the witty banter, it's all there.
And speaking of dramatic entrances, here comes Strong Fang.
Oh, yeah. Strong Fang, this massive muscular furry. I mean, he's got claws that could probably tear a dreadnought in half. He's clearly meant to be, the big bad, the final boss, this intimidating, almost unstoppable force.
Right, he's got the whole package, the imposing physique, the dramatic poses, the roars. He's ripped straight from a fighting game.
But of course, our brave Space Marines, they're not backing down. I mean, they are paragons of the Emperor's might, after all.
It's funny. It's like a David and Goliath setup, except David has a bolter and Goliath is, well, a giant furry.
Exactly. And the action, it's nonstop. Like, there's this whole sequence where Strong Fang is he's unleashing his fury. The Space Marines are holding their ground. And the fate of, well, probably not the whole galaxy, but at least this forest is hanging in the balance. And then there's that moment where Strong Fang, he tries to, let's just say he gets a little too close for comfort with one of the Space Marines.
Yeah, the stuffy armor line.
Yeah, that was a choice.
Definitely pushing the boundaries, even for this video.
I mean, I'll admit I had to rewind that part just to make sure I heard it right.
It's definitely not for the easily offended.
No, not at all. But I guess, we were talking about satire here. And satire often relies on exaggeration and shock value to get its point across.
Right. And whether it's effective or not, I mean, that's really up to the individual viewer to decide.
True enough. So back to the fight, right? We've got this intense back and forth. And just when you think it can't get any more insane, Strong Fang drops the retards line.
Yeah, that one definitely gave me pause.
Yeah, me too. I mean, it's obviously meant to be shocking. But it does kind of raise questions about using that kind of language in comedy.
Yeah.
Even when the intent is, satirical.
It's a tough one, isn't it? Where do you draw the line? I mean, on the one hand, comedy can be a way to challenge norms, to push boundaries. But on the other hand, there's a responsibility to not, perpetuate harmful stereotypes or language. It's a debate that's been going on forever, and I think ultimately it comes down to individual interpretation, what each person finds acceptable.
Yeah, for sure. Something to think about. But, you got to bet the way they end this whole thing, it's kind of brilliant.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, after all that chaos, all that carnage, they end it with one line, "Avenge the fallen and buy this T-shirt."
It's perfect. It's the perfect blend of cynicism and humor. Like they're breaking the fourth wall, poking fun at themselves, at the whole merchandise culture that surrounds things like Warhammer 40K.
It's so self-aware. And it works perfectly because it leaves you laughing and it reminds you not to take any of this too seriously.
Speaking of not taking things too seriously, you're the Warhammer 40K expert here. Do you think, realistically, do you think a giant furry could actually, stuff a fully armored Space Marine like they suggest in the video?
Well, let's just say that the logistics of that seem improbable. Space Marine power armor is notoriously bulky, and while there are certain anatomical limitations to consider, it's definitely a moment where you have to embrace the absurdity and just roll with it.
Right. It's all in good fun.
Yeah.
Okay, so to recap, right, this gloriously absurd battle, we've got Space Marines versus furries, over-the-top action, questionable anatomical feats, and of course, a healthy dose of humor. What more could you ask for?
And, even underneath all the silliness, there might be some deeper questions lurking there. This clash between, the Space Marines representing this order and authority and the furries representing, well, something else entirely. It could be a commentary on something bigger.
Okay, I'm intrigued. Tell me more.
Well, think about it. Could this outlandish premise actually be a satirical take on the fear of the other, the clash between different ideologies, or maybe, the way society tries to categorize and control anything that doesn't fit the norm? What do you think?
That's really interesting. I mean, it's amazing how something so seemingly silly can actually spark these kinds of questions.
Exactly. That's the power of satire, right? To make us think about things in a new way, even if it's through a lens of absurdity. But we've got one more part to go, so let's wrap up this gloriously weird battle and move on to the grand finale of Furry Crusades.
Okay, so we've journeyed through this insane world of furry crusades. We've seen the ambush, the boss battle, a planet with some serious anger issues, and well, some pretty questionable anatomical feats.
It's been a wild ride.
It really has. But before we, declare victory and head back to the real world, I think we need to take a minute to, consider what we've actually learned here.
Yeah, it's easy to just focus on the humor and the over-the-top nature of it all, but there's definitely a layer of social commentary here that I think is worth exploring.
Right. Like earlier we were talking about how the Space Marines kind of represent this rigid order, this unwavering conformity, and then you've got the furries who embody something else entirely, something more chaotic, more individualistic.
Yeah, it's like they're two sides of the same coin.
And like that scene where the Space Marine Templar just starts hurling all those awful names at the furries.
Yeah.
It's shocking, for sure. But it also kind of reflects how those prejudices exist in the real world too, right? That fear of anything that's different.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking too. It's almost like the video is trying to say, look, this is how ridiculous prejudice can be. Like, even in a world with genetically engineered super soldiers and sentient planets, you still have people finding reasons to hate and fear each other.
It's like prejudice is the one constant no matter what universe you're in.
Exactly. And isn't that kind of the whole point of satire? To use humor to point out the absurdity of real-world problems, even the ones that are, uncomfortable to talk about. I mean, who would have thought a video about Space Marines fighting furries would end up being a commentary on social tolerance and acceptance?
Right. It's pretty amazing, actually.
It really is. We're so used to seeing Space Marines as these symbols of strength and conformity. But this video, it takes that familiar image and it turns it upside down.
It does. It pits them against this group that's so completely different, that challenges their entire worldview. And even though the video doesn't endorse that hateful language, it still forces you to confront it. It makes you think about those uncomfortable truths.
Exactly. And then that ending with the "Avenge the Fallen and buy this t-shirt" line. I mean, come on, that's genius.
I know, right? It's like they're acknowledging the whole commercial aspect of this kind of entertainment, but they're poking fun at themselves at the same time.
It's so self-aware. It's like they're saying, we know this is ridiculous, you know this is ridiculous, but hey, we all need a good laugh.
And they definitely delivered on the laugh. So to our listeners out there, what are your thoughts on all this? What did you take away from this deep dive into Furry Crusades?
Did it change how you think about Space Marines? About furries? About satire itself?
Or maybe about sentient, angry planets? I know I'll never look at a mountain the same way again.
Yeah, me neither. But one thing's for sure, this deep dive has been one for the ages. For the Emperor.
For the Emperor.